The Foreign Secretary, Philip Hammond, has ruled out any alliance with President Assad of Syria to combat the threat posed by the militant group Islamic State. There have been calls for the UK to open talks with Damascus in the wake of the advance of the extremists and the beheading of the American journalist James Foley. Well, that debate is continuing about how best to try and tackle the increasingly dominant force of IS in Iraq and Syria. The United States says the militants are the most dangerous threat America has faced in years. Well, as we know, many British citizens are abroad fighting for Islamic State, including some born and educated in Wales. The former Foreign Office Minister and former chair of the Parliamentary Intelligence and Security Committee, Kim Howells, told BBC Radio Wales that successive UK governments and parts of the Muslim community itself were to blame.
There's what they call a narrative out there, a story that all Muslims are victims, that they're the victims of a kind of American Christian, Judeo-Christian plot to keep them all down, to suppress them. And it's a very attractive thing. If you're not doing very well in terms of a job, if your community's poor, it's a very good excuse to fall back on. It's a plot against Islam. It's a plot against Muslims. And I'm afraid that the imams, the religious leaders within those communities have never done enough to counter it, let alone governments. Governments have been afraid to touch it. They've allowed those communities to become isolated, to look inward instead of trying to integrate with the rest of society. And they've said, well, that's all right, that's multiculturalism.
Well, let's speak to Usman Nawaz, who's a former member of the Young Muslim Advisory Group. Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Nelly.
Yeah, what did you make of what Kim Howells says there? I mean, is there any truth in that? Do you think that young Muslims do feel like victims?
I think there is a constituency of young Muslims who, through personal grievances, so that might be being victims of racist or Islamophobic abuse, the system may have also abused them, i.e. them not being able to get on in education or in employment because of their faith or their race or because of the colour of their skin. And therefore, they look towards where they can find a support structure. And some people find that support structure within organisations where they feel that they're making a difference, that they have a say, that they have people around them who believe in them. And sometimes those organisations are indeed organisations such as IS and others who kind of say, come and join us and be a part of us. But I must say that the vast majority of young Muslims completely reject ISIS, and in fact the Muslim community in general reject ISIS and everything that they stand for. And I don't actually accept that just because you're from a low socioeconomic background or from a deprived community necessarily means that you will go and join a terrorist organisation. If we look at the young men who have travelled from Cardiff, for example, one of them was somebody who's studying medicine. Another one wanted to become the first Asian British Prime Minister in the UK. One from Coventry, one was an aspiring model, two 16-year-old girls from Manchester with 28 GCSEs between them. These aren't uneducated people. These are people from strong families, from not from broken homes, but yet somehow they are the very people ending up almost on the front line in Syria and Iraq.
I mean, okay, so if we accept that there are these young people who may have these feelings for a variety of reasons, I mean, I suppose the question is whose job is it, or who can keep an eye on them and keep them in check? Again, Kim Howells talks about the imams there. Realistically, how much contact would a young person have with an imam? I mean, he can't know what that person is doing the whole time.
No, exactly, and I mean, even parents don't know what their children are doing all of the time and all day. I do agree with Mr. Howells on the point that the government and the imams need to do more. However, I reject his notion that the imams, have almost kind of isolated and not even gone near this problem. The imams that I've spoken to and that I've listened to and that I've heard very, very clearly, even a few weeks ago in Ramadan, in their sermons were absolutely categoric about ISIS being a non-Islamic organisation, that in fact it does not represent anything to do with Islam. And I've seen imams come out on social media and give the same message as well. But I think in general, we as a Muslim community need to do something to create safe spaces for dialogue. We have to accept that there are people who do find the ISIS narrative, and to use the word that Mr. Howells was using, the ISIS notion about creating this so-called utopian Islamic state. There are people who might accept that and find that attractive, but we need to challenge that. We need to know who they are, and we need to address and challenge them.
Okay, thank you for your thoughts this evening. That was Usman Nawaz there, who's a former member of the Young Muslim Advisory Group.